Hello, everyone, and welcome to Downtime. I'm still used to like overtime, downtime. That we changed the names way too many times. Thank you all for joining us. Um, so a quick programming note: later tonight, 9:30 p.m., we're going to have on Commander Lance McMillan. A lot to talk about. There are strikes now in Ukraine that are like right next to Moscow. It's insane. It puts Putin in an even worse position. We're going to talk about that. Well, it's going to be a downtime, so two downtimes. You guys are lucky. I don't know. You know what? It's Christmas. We're giving. We're also going to try to have a nice chillax one on that one tomorrow. 1 p.m. Eastern. We're going to have Operator Starsky. Allowing power in Ukraine is more than 80% of Ukraine is out. Internet is virtually non-existent. If we can get a hold of Operator Starsky, we will have him on. That's always hit or miss. So we know he's been able to do some streams, missed others. We're going to work on it. Now, today we have on Reverend Martin Joss. Good sir, how are you?
Oh, I'm fine, thanks, Nick. I just say about that carol?
Please, yes.
I saw a lovely meme the other day. It says, the Virgin Mary, having just got baby Jesus asleep, encounters a young boy who thinks what she needs is a drum solo.
That's a good one. I got another one. There was one that really just spoke to me, and had Baby Yoda. He's holding an apple, but it basically said, now as an adult, I finally understand the Grinch. It's not that he hated Christmas, it's that he hated people, and that's fair. Just like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, now I will say this is going to confuse people because it says in time. We hadn't decided whether this was going to be an in time or downtime. Lots of logistics on how we were going to do the show. I really wanted to do this downtime and just have this much more conversational, and I think your style and my style is very amicable to that. But I did decide to wear the coat, the $400 suit, which this is the first time I've ever worn it on downtime. Usually I'm more laid back. And I'm going to out myself. It was genuinely a symbol of respect. So I said, okay, you're going to be on. We're going to have this. And now what I'm going to need to do is go for just 1 second because there's a cat that turns out snuck into the office and needs to get out. I'm going to go let it out. But while I deal with the feline, could you tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Martin Joss. I'm 62, married to Val for the last 32 years, got 2 grown-up children. And since the end of August, I've been living in Peterborough here in the UK, quite a historic place. I live about a mile away from a cathedral that was built in 1100 and something. So it's a very historic area. Trying to work out what's keeping Nick. Nick, are you actually trying to explode that cat?
No, I was getting the cat out, but I like watching you squirm. Yeah, I'll be honest, there was no cat. So, which gets us to the other thing we talked about. I'd like to have you back at at your earliest convenience, and there's going to be scheduling, I know, but we had talked right before the show about lying, which is actually another really fascinating topic for me, and the reason is because people sort of, if you say something that you believed but turned out not to be true, was that a lie? If you say something that wasn't true, but you had no intention to deceive, was that a lie? And you and I already, I think you and I could go on for a long time on that one. You had some good examples. So we'll have to bring you back to discuss that because that's an interesting topic.
So if I said I really like you, then I have to try and work out whether I'm lying or not.
Yeah, you see, you don't even know. The question is if you haven't yet made up your mind, or what happens if it changes from day to day. We have this. We keep getting hit as like an atheist show because most of us are atheists, but we're not an atheist channel. So if we were, I'm sure just having you on, like, keyboard would be on fire or something. I don't know. Apparently, I've broken a lot of atheists. I'm a sinner at this point, but Um, what we actually have you on for, of course, today is to discuss forgiveness, and that's a topic that's kind of near and dear to my heart. I know it is to yours, so I don't know. Did you want to start off with your thoughts on what that is and whether it's important or not, and so on and so forth? And we'll just give this a shot.
Oh gosh, that's a big area. But I think where I suppose the bottom line for me is that forgiveness is actually about counterintuitively doing something that seems to go against my natural nature, but is actually good for me, and that it it's a way of trying to live so that you're not you're trying to let go of stuff, because if we don't let go of if all the ill feeling we can get towards people and ourselves, if we're not careful, we can be so filled up with stuff that actually, we end up ill wishing other people. And you said, that revenge is a bit like you trying to kill someone by you being the one who drinks the poison. And so I mean, it doesn't. It certainly hasn't been in my basic nature to be a forgiving person, and I'm a work in progress. But I believe it's something that we can train ourselves towards.
Well, I think sort of like when I look at it, and at some point I'm going to take this off because this is really starting to bug me. But anyways, I think when I think about it, um, look, I mean, I struggle with forgiveness too, but I've noticed something, which is that, first of all, most people who have done something that hurt me did so usually either out of ignorance. Now I am getting some. I'm hearing myself through your, and it wasn't doing that earlier. Now it is. So I don't know if you can either. You're going to have to hear it. So I don't know how we fix that. Oh, could you mute? I tell you what. When you're not talking, if you could mute, um, that way I don't hear myself coming through your audio.
Right. That would be on my skill set. How do I do that?
All right. Well, you should. Let's see. From your end here, I'm not used to doing it from the guest. I'm used to muting others.
Oh, down here.
If you should have a. Oh, it looks like. Yep. Oh, no, no, no. Well, I might be able to mute you, but I don't know. You could unmute yourself if I did that.
Oh, hang on. No, not hang up. Hang up. Blah, 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 blah.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, that's done. All right. Now that you can't talk, let me tell you all the objections I have to you and your church. Now, um, so, no, let's see. We were talking about. Okay, so either people do things that they do that hurt us out of ignorance. In general, there are exceptions to this. There's sociopaths, there's psychopaths. So there are people who do it, just because that's their nature. And I think we should talk about that. How do you forgive that? But in my view, most of the time, when people cause us harm, it's out of either ignorance or out of anger or pain or something like that, and maybe towards you and maybe towards somebody else. One of the things that people don't understand about basic psychology actually is oftentimes your emotion starts first and then what you're angry about comes second. So, you could, if I get angry or triggered by something else, or if I've had too much caffeine or something, somebody cuts me off, all of a sudden I'm pissed about something my wife did 20 years ago that I forgot to, but now I'm angry and it's not that, it's something else. So, I'm going to wrap it up and then throw it to you. But so this strikes me as two things to this. One, okay, if people are doing it because they're angry and not necessarily at me, it certainly makes it easier to forgive and empathize. But the other thing is, most of the times when I've done things I'm not proud of, or I need to forgive other people, has been out of anger. And anger is infectious. If somebody hurts me, I want to hurt them. And if I can't hurt them, I'm going to go out and hurt other people and then pass that on. So if I want to like myself, I usually find I have to try to find a way to deal with it at that point, at the point where I've been hurt, and not let it spread. So a psychologist friend of mine called it the psychopathology the contagious nature of psychopathology. So how feelings are actually contagious and ripple. And I'd love to talk about that, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on everything I just said. All of it. If you miss
Well,
something,
as
if you miss
so,
something, I wrote it all down. So I'm gonna be offended if you. Anyway, sorry.
yeah, as you were talking, I was very much reminded. There's a Roman Catholic priest who's a psychotherapist, and I read something not so long ago that I thought was very profound. That he said, which is that pain that isn't transformed is transmitted. And
Mm.
that it seems to me that captures something very important because there's a whole lot of pain out in the world for a whole lot of reasons, and it seems to me that if we don't find a way of transforming it when it comes our way, we just carry on in the loop. And that if we were, if we want to be, if we want to see, I suppose I would say, if I want to see the world being a better place, the only place that I have any authority and proper control over is actually me. And that and so actually, if I want to see these transmissions come to a halt, then what I need to do is be prepared to transform the pain. And that's actually good for me as well as good for the world around me.
So, does that mean we're not entitled to our pain or to get upset if somebody, does something to us? We just need to forgive them, and that's it.
No, no. I mean, I think there are. I think it is possible to rush to forgiveness, as of like, oh, I should forgive people, and then jump straight to that. And I don't think. I think forgiveness is a process, not a point, and that I mean, because if somebody does something a little to slight you, then of course it should be relatively easy to let go of that. Um, I would say, I mean, let me jump to the chase. Probably the single hardest thing I've ever had to forgive in my life was when my wife had an ectopic pregnancy, and obviously it would have been fatal for her and the baby. So she had to have an operation and the tube removed. And when I was seeking time off from my employers, and I had to have a discussion with somebody in management, and I actually had, and I know this might get a bit contentious, but it was suggested when I said that I was needing the time off, and I said that my father couldn't understand why I was getting such a hard time for some compassionate leave, and I just quoted my father, and he said that he said, well, all you've done is lose a baby, and they're trying to treat you like you're trying to get away with something. And what I got back in the meeting was, oh, well, if your wife was only 6 weeks pregnant, a lot of people would say you hadn't lost a baby. Now, I recognize, different people have different views, but our view was we'd lost a baby. And I, I actually, I actually was so angry about that. I realized that I could have trashed that man's reputation just by dropping it in the right places. And I was mindful that the really angry part of me wanted to do that, but I also knew that that if I did that, I would have to then face that myself at some point. And I didn't want to be that kind of person. So there were one or two people who I knew could keep confidence that I told that allowed me to start to let go of it. But it took me years to be able to forgive that. I think I genuinely have forgiven it. But I'm sure to the day I die, I won't forget it.
Oh wow. Um, Let me. Well, I'm trying to remember because you've said a couple of things that I want to go on. I want to. There's a lot to unpack there. So Which reminds me, I forgot I was going to ask you in the green room before we started. I don't know how much time you've got, and I don't know how long we're going to run. But I'm hoping if people want to discuss this with you, you might be free if you've got time afterwards to be in the Discord so that other people can ask you questions. Oh, perfect. Thank you. So we'll remind people of that when we get there. I noticed you said something I thought was really interesting, which was I think I've forgiven him, and I found I get that a lot too. And again, I think we think of ourselves, especially atheists, as robots and as machines that can really control our emotions and our biases and all that other stuff. And we've talked on this show a lot about how it's not nearly as true as we'd like to think it is. But I find that sometimes some of the most egregious, at least what I feel to me personally, has been the most egregious things against me. Sometimes I will wake up feeling serene and saying, you know what, I do actually genuinely understand how and why. Some of it was some of it was again, it was misunderstanding this, and some of it was deliberate harm, where it was just like, but I understand it. I've done some things like that too, so I do forgive it, and I'm serene, and I function beautifully through the day, and I feel good, and I don't even feel like it's like, haha, I've forgiven these horrible persons. It's just serene. And then 2 weeks later, I wake up and it's just like, oh, how could I have ever thought that? So it's like, how do you know? Is there a point where you've forgiven someone? And how does that, because you said it, you said where I think that's an interesting, so could you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think it's the because well, I suppose for me, the where I start with forgiveness, I mean, as it has a bearing as a Christian, and as a Christian, I believe that I have been forgiven a lot by God, and that actually there's nothing anybody else, and there's nothing that anybody can do to me that would mean they have uh, wronged me more than what I have been forgiven. So I seek to try to keep that in mind. And yeah, it's I suppose forgiving people. It, I'm reminded of what somebody else I know said in the context of how do you love people? How do you seek to love people who you don't find lovely? And the best advice I ever heard on that was that is to behave towards people as if you love them. And if you do that for long enough, your emotions will catch up with your actions. And that's how I think I would want to be with forgiveness. Is that I mean I once had a parishioner who had an absolute pig of a husband, and she became a Christian, and she was talking to me about forgiveness, and she was saying, Martin, I don't know that I can ever forgive this man. And I said, well, that's okay. I said, uh, I said, so I said, what do you think? What do you think God would want you to do? She said, well, I think God would want me to forgive him. And I said, so who's right? Who would be right? You or God? He said, well, if God is God, then it would be God. And I said, okay. So I said, what you're saying is you want to be able to forgive him, but you can't find it in you to. And as far as I'm concerned, obviously from my position as a theist, God can work with that intention. But and it's really it is something. I mean, if somebody's really done something awful to you or those you love, I think there'd be something really wrong if your first instinct wasn't to be want to strike back and to feel the pain, because it will be painful.
So uh, so I think it was Titan mentioned, and I think you and I had actually discussed this in the green room beforehand, which is, can't forgiveness end up encouraging more aggression towards you? I mean, if you're the kind of person who's going to be forgiving, how many people do you think would take advantage of that? Is that, how much of a problem is that?
Okay, that's a good question. Now, I guess it doesn't mean yeah, I'm quite clear that as a Christian, I'm not called to be a doormat. Because if you let people just constantly walk all over you, I mean, it's not good for your own self and your own self worth, but also to be on, it then encourages people to carry on and do it to other people. But I think if somebody behaved badly towards me, I think what I would do is bear in mind what they had done. I would want to forgive them, but depending on what it was I was forgiving, I would have a boundary which I would hold that I wouldn't want them to cross further. Or I mean, suppose somebody stole from me, I would forgive them, but I would sure want to make sure they didn't get anywhere near anything that I held of monetary value.
Well, and so forgiveness isn't. It sounds like, at least in your view, forgiveness is more of an emotional wiping the slate clean, but not a like. Um, I think Maya put it in the live chat. It's like you can forgive somebody, but they still end up having to do jail time if it's and there's also societal the debt to society and yada yada yada. What is I, I'm having issues framing this. So maybe you can expand. Maybe I've given you enough. You can expand on yourself. And I said this wasn't going to be an interview, and here I am. But anyways, please.
Let me jump in. I suppose, yeah, I can remember many years ago uh, being really moved by a vicar in the Midlands in this country whose son, I think
What
his
on
7-year-old son, had been.
what is a vicar? I thought you spoke English, for crying out loud.
Okay, a vicar in the Church of England is a priest who's in charge of a parish. Thank you. Yeah. And this vicar had his 7-year-old son had been knocked down by a drunk driver, and when it came to the court case, this vicar actually stood up and said he forgave the man who had done this, and he said because as far as he was concerned, the man was going to have to live with the rest of his life with what he had done, and there was nothing that the vicar could wish for that would be a worse sentence than that. I mean, he wasn't saying don't send the man to jail, but he was saying, his view was there was no, he didn't need, he wanted to forgive him because the man would struggle to forgive himself ever.
Well, and you can only speak for yourself, right? So if somebody has committed a crime against multiple people, which something like that really, really has, then you can forgive for yourself, but that doesn't necessarily, I think, speak to others. So for me, it has most to do with empathy. So it's sort of like we talked about it earlier, like when I try to see how and why other people, and I find that most of the time, behavior that I find um, even on some cases abhorrent, I'm like, well, if I were in the right circumstances, I might end up being very similar to that. So, and I don't know everybody else's circumstances. It's very self-aggrandizing to say, I would never do what that person did, especially if whatever they did hurt me. But the reality is, given enough anger, trauma, bullying yourself, and the best indicator, the best predictor of who is going to be a bully and go out and harm other people deliberately is who's been bullied themselves. So bullying tends to beget other bullying. And so it's easy for me to say that, well, gee, I would never do that, but I don't know what that person's life is. And there are sociopaths, there are psychopaths that I don't think I'm capable of that lack of empathy. But those extremes notwithstanding, I think when you're talking about, I did lose my train of thought there. When you're talking about forgiveness, a part of it is sort of understanding the pain and suffering that they are going through, at least in the case that you were talking about there. But what if they don't regret it? What if they really feel absolutely justified in what they've done?
Okay. That's a really, really interesting one, because I know some people who are quite clear that they would say you can't forgive someone who won't accept they've done something wrong.
And let me interrupt,
My
which
own
is it
view of
that
Let me interrupt.
that's also a
Yeah.
tenet. Oh, sorry, could you mute for a second? Sorry,
Sorry.
I did interrupt you. You've been insanely good at that. I have never seen anyone that good at the mute button. You probably don't belong on In Time. I can't. I've never handled the mute button like that. But I've heard. Dear Lord, my brain really is all over the place today. Yes, it is the tenet of some articles of certain Christian sects as well. I think that's worth noting, that you cannot be forgiven without asking for forgiveness. So I wanted to so you've not only heard that, you've seen that quite regularly, I would suspect.
Yeah, I mean, with the mute button thing, Nick, it's all down to a matter of forgiveness. So don't worry. No, and yeah, and for me, I get where people come from on that, but I suppose, using another analogy, there's a Saint Paul in the Bible in one place says, "As far as you are able, live at peace with everyone." Now, I cannot make everyone live at peace with me, but I can decide how I'm going to try and live with everybody. And so part of trying to live at peace with people, as far as I can, I want to be someone who is kind and forgiving. And again, not least of which, I think part of it is to be aware of your own fallibility and your own weaknesses. I'll tell you a childhood story of mine that again, about what directions you choose to travel in. This isn't so much a story of me being forgiven, but me being a transgressor and having to forgive myself. When I was 9 or 10, I had an argument with a friend of mine, and I had this toy spear that was probably, I don't know, about 4 foot long and maybe about that diameter. And we had this argument. He pushed me into a bed of roses. I got cut up, and he started to walk away laughing. I don't know whether it's the fact I've got Vikings in my background on my father's side, which is probably certain. But I just lost it, and I ran up behind him with this thing, and I hit him across the back so hard I broke that piece of wood in two. And I realized that day that if I didn't do something about it, I would probably kill somebody by the time I was 18. And it took me a long while to forgive myself. But again, I think all these things are all intermeshed, and it's all part of what's made me try to be a gentle and forgiving person, because by my own nature, I have a horrible temper. It's just I don't normally manage to let it out. But if you play your cards right tonight, it might happen.
Listen, I've been trying to trigger you since the day we've met, and so far all that happens is you just mock me right back, which is immensely frustrating. Um, so let's see. Yeah, I want to talk about anger. I want to talk. And we mentioned this earlier about forgiving yourself, which I think is a very difficult and complex topic. But before we go on any of that, I don't believe in the Christian God, and a good number of our audience as well does not. You had said that one of the techniques that you use is to think about the fact that you have had far more forgiven. For most atheists or people of other religions that are not Christian, they don't have that to fall back on. And one of the things I've noticed about talking with you, because you and I have also spoken outside of the show, and I consider you a friend. You're very good at counseling. I think me, and I've even asked you about this, counseling others who are not of your faith in ways that they can relate to. So now I'm going to ask you, what are you going to tell people who don't have that starting point to work with?
Oh, I think I think one of the things that I think, whether people believe in a God or not, I think the kind of rule of thumb of I mean, this thing about love other people as you love yourself, or I like to turn that on its head a bit, because I'm someone who grew up not loving myself very much, and I think so I would say it. Treat other people as you would want to be treated, love other people as you would want to be loved, and I I try to be forgiving to other people when they mess up and make mistakes or make my life difficult for some reason, because I know in part it's not going to be of if I make my next mistake, but a matter of when I make my next mistake. And I try to treat people who have messed up with me as well as I can, on the grounds that I hope that when it's my turn, other people will do the same. Doesn't always work out that way, but that's fine. I would, at the end, at the part of the bottom line, I think for all of us is at the very least, the thing you can choose to do is don't be a dick.
We should. Yeah, I think that's going to be a great meme. I think we should put that on the In Time Discord. Don't be a dick. Um, I got to tell you, when I first started dating my wife, um, you know, uh, we had a profound disagreement on something, and afterwards, she was actually treating herself harder on it than I was, and I told her that I'd forgive her. I didn't, I was okay with it, and we could move on. And if she wanted help discussing it, we could. But she said, "Well, is what is it? Do you want something for this, or what is it?" I said, "Well, it's not that I want something, but I recognize that someday I'm going to need forgiveness too, and this is a decent way to start, is to try to remember that we're all fallible." And she gave me this look like, it's like, "What are you planning on doing? Are you already? Is there something I haven't caught that you've been doing?" She's just being like, just like, "No, I'm serious." And she's like, and it's been 20 or 30 years, and I still say that. I still say that. And to this day, she still thinks there was something in the closet. She can't get over that mistrust. But so what do you anger? It's funny because that line from, and I have friends who've told this to me too. The line from the Avengers, which here I am, I'm about to quote this. It's probably one of the best lines in any movie I've ever seen, really, that spoke to me in so many ways. When Bruce Banner is saying he's got a secret, but he's not going to say what it is, and he has to turn into the Hulk here and there. Finally, he turns around and this is what, you want to know what the secret is? I'm always angry. And, that spoke to me in a way I hadn't really considered. And you've spoken about the anger what do you do with, all right, here we go. So I don't know. Do I need to, let me get some, hold on a sec, just so that you feel more comfortable. I know you're not Catholic, but I'm just going to, okay, Father, am I blocking the camera right? Okay, Father, it's been help me, I know you don't do confessions, but I've felt a lot of anger.
Oh, I can do.
Felt a lot of anger. Okay.
I'm quite happy to take confession if it's really juicy and I can sell it to the tabloids, Nick.
In that case, we're not going to do confession.
I think anger, I think again, it's about this thing about seeking to transform it. Now, when I was younger, so I'll start that again, because I was about to say when I was younger, I loved heavy metal music. I still do. But when I was younger, before I was a Christian, the way I used to try and deal with anger, I would have said I dealt with it by if somebody upset me, I'd had a really bad day, I'd go to my bedroom, stick on my cans, and just blast myself with heavy rock music. And I said that was dealing with it. What I actually realized sometime later was that actually somehow that was feeding it more. It wasn't dissipating it. And the yeah, I mean, I think the only way I've found of dealing with the anger is not to bury it, because I think when you bury feelings, it ends up like a bottle of soda that you could have a bottle of soda that you'd never ever opened, and if you could stick it in a machine that just constantly was shaking it day and night, eventually that bottle would burst from the pressure. You so and I think it's about finding. I mean, well, I suppose for me, I'm trying to avoid uh, falling back on God because of the context we're here. But for me, it is a big part of it. I try to be honest about myself before God, and somehow that helps. I can't, I guess it's one of these things, it's quite a personal experience, so I can't tell you kind of how that is, but trying to do that, and well, I suppose people meditate in different ways, and trying to be someone who contemplates and tries to still myself inside, over time, that's helping to make me a bit of a quieter person, and a bit of a, and that helps me to be a calmer person, a kinder person. And yeah, and if I'm allowed to blow my own trumpet just a little bit, one of the most touching things I have had ever said about me was when my daughter uh, told me in the first year at university, she was talking with her friends, some new friends, about their parents, and she wanted me to know that she had told them that I was one of the kindest people she knew. And that meant a lot to me, because the first place people are going to call you out if you're bluffing is your family.
Mm, that's a good point. Interesting observation. I wanted to touch briefly. We moved on. I want to go back briefly to a friend of mine who had worked at a prison. He was a psychologist in a prison, a supermax facility in the United States, and he was a psychologist there. So if you can imagine providing therapy to the worst human beings that literally walk the face of the earth, ones that should never be allowed out under any set of circumstances. Um, and he found, while he was trying to work with him, his own anger and rage welling up in him just by being that close to the inhumanity. So he developed a thesis about the contagious nature of psychopathology. So, but it cuts both ways. So we'll talk about anger, revenge. You had said that I think it's a Buddhist saying. Anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other one to die, and it's also like alcohol. To tell you the truth, I love alcohol. It's it can be, it's an analgesic. It makes you feel better, but it's a very temporary thing. It's actually a depressant. So in the short term, it makes you feel good, but in the long term, the negative effect is uh, outweighs the positive effect, and that's how people can get stuck in this cycle with it. And I think anger is very much the same. It's self-aggrandizing to go out and ruin somebody else's day. It's an expression of power. If you feel that you've been denied power or had your power taken from you by whoever you're angry with, by however way you've, for lack of a better word, been victimized, this is a way of reestablishing it. But what you've now done is transmitted that, and I do sometimes use evil for lack of a better word. You've transmitted it from you who received it now on to that person who is going to transmit it to others. And it actually does lose. Usually you don't, well, you can end up amplifying it, but usually as it transmits, it kind of loses some of its initial strength, but everybody's transmitting to everybody. So you can hit somebody who's received whacks from six other people who are angry, and it ends up amplifying within an individual. But the other thing is, compassion does that too. If somebody shows you compassion, and when somebody showed, we were at a fair, and my daughter spent all her allowance at one of those machines that's completely rigged. You're not going to win. And we kept trying to tell her she couldn't win it, but she wouldn't hear it. And, it broke her heart. And that affected me quite negatively. I was like, what kind of motherfucker rigs machines with these little kids who are... And then there was one where there was a contest, and there's always a winner. But, they got 5 or 6 people going. 2 people on the end did it. My daughter and my eldest decided to spend her allowance to try to win something for her younger sister. So I was immensely proud, but I also knew they were going to probably get beaten, which they were. But then the woman on the end came down and said, I like the way you played that. Why don't you pick the prize and it's yours? And that made my day. And here I am telling you that and hopefully transmitting some of that goodness. And maybe people who hear that story feel a bit better, but it changed everybody's experience of that day, and it cost the woman one prize she was probably too old to enjoy anyway. So it works both ways, and I wanted to say that and hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's right. I mean, basically, I mean, I suppose you say as I understand the whole thing about the battle for good and evil, for the want of any other frame of reference, is that actually all of us, every moment of every day, are faced with choices that we can either make a life-giving choice or one that isn't, and that and we do all mess up, and that for me it's something we but equally we can be capable of amazingly good things, and absolutely, and I think the one thing that I'm quite clear about is that actually in a world where there's horrific violence, that actually the long-term solution to violence is never going to be more violence. That actually, I genuinely believe that love is going to end up winning, because actually love is stronger than violence. And I know people sometimes say, "Oh, that's idealistic and everything else," but kind of, Gandhi had the great, look at the power and the authority that was waging against Gandhi in the form of the British government and the empire in India, but through non-violence, Gandhi managed to defeat it.
I've forgotten the name of it, but there's a question as to, and it's got a name as to why we haven't encountered aliens. And I believe any combination of answers, not the least of which is maybe we have, and we encounter them every day, but we're not aware. Fish in a fish tank aren't aware that they're encountering people, or that there are people in the environment. So it's possible we do.
As far as we know.
As far as we know, but I think probably what's more likely, a couple of things, and we have an N of 1. We have only one sample, which is our own planet. But throughout time, man has been very egocentric, and the original tribes of men thought they were the only tribes, and they found other tribes, and like, oh, there are more here. Nations found other nations, continents found other continents. We thought we were the only planet in the solar system. Nope, there's more. We thought we had the only sun. Nope, there's more. The only solar system. Nope. Well, or the only galaxy. No, there's huge. And then, oh, well, there's only one universe. I find that highly unlikely. But I also find it unlikely that we'd be the only intelligent life out there. So why haven't we encountered them? And I've thought about this, and one answer that most of us have heard of is that once you reach the ability to harness the atom, you've got a very big problem. because if you don't find a way to let compassion win, you will wipe yourselves out. We now have the capacity to do that. So the question is, how long on a time scale do we go before that happens? And 99% of all life that's existed on Earth has wiped itself out or been eradicated by natural selection. It wouldn't surprise me if that number carried on reasonably on other worlds. So I'm not as convinced that love will win. I'm genuinely not. But I am convinced that if we are going to get off this planet, cooperation is the only way we've built societies. It's ethics, morality, and empathy, which I think is what we're talking about here. Empathy is the only way we've been able to build any kind of civilization. And if we are not capable of overcoming a aggressive and angry tendency, without which we would not have survived, by the way. So these two are at tension. We cannot continue without overcoming it, but we wouldn't have gotten to where we were if we didn't have it in the first place. I'm not as convinced it's going to win, but I am convinced we will not succeed as a species. We will wipe ourselves out if we don't control it. Any thoughts on that? I saw you writing something down, so I'm assuming.
No, it's. I mean, it's so yeah. I'm going to go for it. I'm going to give in to temptation and say there must be intelligent life out there somewhere because it must exist somewhere. It certainly isn't much on Earth.
Okay, I'm going to mute for a second. So so everybody knows, I need you to mute because they're gonna. Okay, just so everybody knows, this is the kind of crap I have to put up with this guy on Twitter. This is just constantly, and it's worse than that. He says, "Oh, hey, I'm like this nice guy, and everyone thinks I'm this." It's because he takes it out on me. The stuff he says on Twitter, I now you can follow him. I'll drop the link. If you're following, you'll see it. I'm not. I just like so. You're welcome, because if he didn't have that catharsis of taking it out on me, I'm just saying. Anyways, I interrupted. Please continue.
Okay, no, right. Well, this is going off topic, but you started it. Just so I don't mind people out there knowing, yeah, on Tuesday next, I'm having surgery for cancer. And I know Nick doesn't pray, so I have asked him to sacrifice a black chicken at midnight, which apparently he is going to do. So all's good.
He did. He asked me to do that.
He asked me to. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think I mean, the whole thing of that, your kind of ultimately pessimistic view, and I get that. I think, I guess, there's a saying: you pays your money and you takes your choice. And I know by nature, I could be, I'm an optimist. I recognise that. I mean, although having said that, I was once interviewed for a job where one of the questions was describe yourself in a sentence, and I've never forgotten what I came up with spur of the moment because it was so bang to rights, which was, I'm not sure if I'm an optimist who's saved by my cynicism or a cynic who's saved by my optimism. But yeah, I think it's one of those things, is everything going to work out ultimately for good in the end? Well, I'd say, I'm not always the best shining example of being a Christian. I'd certainly be a pretty lousy one if I actually thought good wasn't going to win in the end. So yes, I'm coloured by that. I appreciate that. But I admire your optimism.
Thank you. And I'll say this. We've had this discussion before. I'm not your typical atheist or anti-theist, and I'm always appreciative when people tell me they're going to pray for me, because I take that as a sign that they care. and it's so it's like it's whether or not I think it's going to be effective is really completely irrelevant. It's a very nice thing to say. So, but I know you've seen them, the atheists who are like, it's like, I'm going to pray for you. They're like, fuck you. It's not going to work. It's like, whoa. It's like, okay, a little overboard, but okay, I get it. But
let me interrupt there, Nick. Don't think I'm such a good guy. I'm quite clear. The best revenge I can have on anybody is to pray for them.
the best revenge you can have on me is to make it through your surgery fine and ask to come back on the show. But and we have $2 from the Sinister Porpoise. Thank you, Sinister. At In Time, we sacrifice hobbits. That's our dirty little secret. We weren't really supposed to talk about that, Sinister, but thank you very much for your support and for the super chat. And that brings me, I think, and there's so much more to unpack, and we actually try to do one of these every Thursday, just kind of an informal chat. So I'm hoping you can come back, and like I said, I can think of 2 or 3 other topics I think would like to discuss. Okay, this is the hardest one, and I think this is going to take some unpacking, which is there's one person that I have immense difficulty forgiving under just about any set of circumstances, and that would be myself. I think this is a common phenomenon. I don't know. I do think too there's some people like, oh, that's easy, but then I tend to think that maybe they're being dismissive and missing something. I don't know. But what are your thoughts on that? Because you've talked about forgiving yourself. And is that important? How, why, and go.
Yeah. Again, sort of as, we were saying before the show about how we in theory are divided by a line, and yet you and I are often, we seem to have far more in common than actually different. So I'm sorry about that. As I'm sure you are too. But I think learning to love ourselves is a really important thing. And it seems to me, human beings, we're really good at splitting ourselves in two. So you either tend to get the folk like me and you who struggle to love ourselves. And of course, the reason why it's hard to forgive yourself is because or the reason why I find it hard to forgive myself when I do is because I'm not showing myself enough love. And then you get people like at the other end who, if I say the Trumps of this world, who are so in love with themselves, how on earth could they need what forgiveness do they need? That it isn't even a thing. And so I think there's this thing about trying to be as kind to yourself as you would to other people. I can I think the example for me would be by nature, if I had a broken leg, I'm quite clear that the way I would deal with that would be to be saying, oh, man up, get over it. There are people in the world with 2 broken legs. I also know as a pastor, if I went to visit a member of my congregation who had a broken leg, and if they said to me, oh, but it could be worse, there are people in this world with 2 broken legs, I would be saying, so how does that make your leg hurt less? And so trying to actually trying to actually learn to love myself, and I think that's the obvious answer. How we do it, I think it's something we all have to feel our own way. It's thankfully, human beings are not off the peg species, and that actually there's an individuality to each of us. I don't know if that helps you, but if depending on whether it will make you hate yourself more or love yourself more, Nick, I think you're lovely.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Although I do want to remind you, this is a family show, so if you can not talk about feeling your way towards loving yourself on air, I would appreciate that. Anyways, I think I mean, I think I think like most things.
Sorry, Nick. Can you explain that? I'm a priest. I don't understand what you're saying.
Uh, uh, I think I'm going to leave it there before. Oh, hold on. My phone is in time, demonetized 6 months. Jesus. They were serious about that one. Okay. Um, oh, God. You see? All right. Um, so I've been thinking about it for myself because we had talked about this show and it's been slated for a little while. And loving, oh, God, now I can't say loving yourself with a straight face. Um, All right, we'll try to adult through this here, but so I poisoned the well on that one. It's entirely my fault. It is oh Jesus, oh God. All right, where's the do I still? Oh, I think I let's just see if I put shields in on the guest. I did. That is delightful. That was an investment in time that has turned out to be well worth it. So, what I found is I think there are elements of that. There's a couple of elements why I find it hard to forgive myself for any number of things. First of all, especially if you've hurt somebody that you care about, I think that makes it really hard. Um, I think also one of the things that makes it easier for me to forgive people, and it's not always easy, but at least easier, is a sense of empathy. But that cuts both ways because then I'm aware of how much pain I've inflicted on others. And that makes it harder for me to forgive myself, especially because I think, shouldn't I know better? One of the ones that struck me earlier this week, thinking about this show, I'm going to say I don't think it's the biggest part, but people who know me are going to sit there and say, yeah, it's probably a pretty big part. Part of it's ego, because you say to yourself, or I say to myself, well, everyone else is an idiot. Of course they're hurting people. Of course they're doing stupid things. I should know better. So you end up with this almost ego. It's harder for me to forgive myself because when I do something wrong, it's worse because I should be smarter. I should know better. And I think the ego plays in a couple of ways on that, but I think that's one of the ways. So I think not forgiving yourself helps play to a sense of ego on that, and and then the other one is I also think I'm terrified that if I forgive myself, then I'm more likely to do that behavior in the future. So it's almost the a reflection of what we've been talking about. And I say, the only way I can really make sure I try never to do something like that again, and I will because I'm human. But the best is to just hammer myself about it day in, day out, so that I feel so shitty about it that I am extra careful about not doing it again. So, any thoughts about those notions?
Yeah. I guess the trouble is, I think the more shitty we feel about ourselves, actually, the more we're then likely to end up doing something really shitty and then saying, "Aha! Of course you did that because you're a shit." Um, and I guess, I mean, the ego one is really interesting because I think the best the best way of dealing with ego, and I mean, we all have an ego. There's no getting away from that. But I think certainly for me, because by the time I was 14, 15, I know being honest, I could have some real pompous moments. And the best way I've learned to deal with that in life is to be constantly bursting my own bubble before somebody else has to burst it for me. I used to have a poster that had a picture of somebody throwing their head back in laughter. And it said, "Blessed are those who can laugh at themselves, for they shall always be amused." And yeah, I think being able to sort of being able to laugh at some of the silly things we do, the more we can laugh at, personally, I say the more I can laugh at myself, the more I can be kind to myself. and then the less all the ego and all the other stuff tends to be a problem. Of course, it's still there, I could certainly say trying. I mean, how old was I? 12 when I had that. I think I was 12, 10 or 12 when I broke that toy spear over somebody's back. I'm now 62. I've still got a ways to go, but you know, I can bring myself to say, and just about not cringe inwardly, that I'm not doing too badly. So there's hope for you yet, Nick.
Oh, well, that's the minority opinion, but thank you. Um, so, well, it's been absolutely delightful, and thank you all for joining us. And you did mention it earlier, so I'll mention it. I know you're going in for surgery, I think, on Tuesday. If people are so inclined to pray and would like to, I think he's well worth it. If you have a secular version, I I I've got to tell you, I always get I feel a little robbed on this front because I'd like to say, well, gee, I'll pray for you, but my atheist friends are like, what the hell did you just say? And I'm just like, well, the I'll think of you doesn't seem to, I think of a lot of things. I mean, I think of my cat. It's not the same thing. And it's a great way to express concern. Until then, you just think happy thoughts. It's the same
Just don't
thing.
hurt any hobbits, Nick. Just don't hurt any hobbits on
Uh,
my account.
well, no, well, my or black chickens, or the I guess the chickens are okay, but I officially all I can say is I don't know what you're talking about. So, but I'll definitely be thinking of you and wishing happy thoughts, and I look forward to seeing how that goes. Look forward to having you back. Did you have any final thoughts or anything that you wanted to say before we head out?
Uh, yeah, it's been fun, and I'm I'm sufficiently confident that God doesn't want you to have such an easy time. I'm going to get through this surgery, and I'll be back.
Yes, I'm reasonably sure that if there is a God, he's just like, well, we were going to call Martin home, but then we realized he's really sticking it to Nick. So I think we'll make sure he gets a couple extra decades in there. It has been delightful as always. We look forward to having you back. Thank you so much for joining. I think this was a spectacular conversation. So thank you for joining us. Good luck, and you're on the Discord already. Oh, and you had said earlier, do you still have a little time for the Discord if people want to chat with you on the VC? Okay, um, VC will open up in a few minutes in our Discord in the main room. Martin will be down there to discuss this with anybody who would like to join us for that. In the meantime, again, actually in just a few hours at 9:30 p.m. Eastern, we're going to have another downtime with Lance McMillan, and hopefully Zandring will be joining us for that. Tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern, we are going to hopefully have on Operator Starsky if he can make it, and we will have Lance McMillan on to discuss a number of things, not the least of which is the ability of Ukraine now to strike as far as Moscow. That's a big deal, and a few other things. I think it's going to be a great couple of weeks. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you once again, Martin, and we look forward to seeing you all later tonight.